All right. Well, thanks so much for having us here today. Um, so we are here to talk about, as Steve said, access to mainstream flight simulation games for blind players. Now, I should start off and say I'm hesitant to even call this a game because if you go on flight simulation forums and you talk about flight simulation being a game, people can get rather upset with you. Um, it's not a game; it's a serious hobby, which it is. But just to put that disclaimer in there. So, just a quick introduction. My name is Jason Fair, and in my day job, I work as National Lead Accessibility and Assistive Technology for the CNIB in Toronto. But that's not what I'm here about today. And I've been a gamer off and on ever since I owned my first computer back in the 80s, which was an Apple IIe, which probably dates me a little bit. Um, so that's me. And Andy, if you want to introduce yourself.
Yeah, so I am Andy Borka. I am a software developer for 10 plus years, mainly focusing in my earlier work focusing on just mainstream software or websites, then leading into accessibility related issues with software and websites. I was a gamer back in the 90s when I could see with Flight Simulator and the all then popular Space Simulator were my favorites, but I really couldn't do much with them because I didn't know avionics as much as I do now. So I am also the vice chair of our local public transit's ADA committee, and I am also a member of International Association of Accessibility Professionals.
Awesome. All right. So go to the next slide here. So blind people interested in flight simulation. So the first thing that people think about often when they think about flight simulation is visuals. And a lot of times, the question I get asked or we get asked is, why do you want to use a flight simulator as a blind person? And there's a couple of different reasons for that. I'd say, the people that are in our community of enthusiasts, and we aren't a huge group, but we're growing, is basically technical interest in aviation, and just understanding how airplanes work. I mean, we've all been on airplanes. I would think most of us have been on airplanes, but how does that all work? How does it work from starting up the plane to taxiing out to takeoff, cruise, landing, all that sort of stuff. And so um, I'd say a lot of us are really interested in the technical aspect. Um, there is interest in obviously the geography where you're flying over. We can't see the scenery, but through various software, including the software that we've written, you can get information about what part of the world you're flying over in various levels of granularity and more to come. And just to experience, like I said, just instrumentation in the cockpit. Like how many of us get to go into the cockpit of a jetliner? I've been in small planes, like little Cessnas, but I was in the cockpit of a jetliner when I was a little kid. When I was in eighth grade or something. Back when you could actually do that sort of thing. So, um, all right. So, history of simulation accessibility. So, this has actually been around for a surprisingly long time. So, and again, we're talking about access to mainstream flight simulators. So, the main simulators we're talking about access to at this point are Microsoft Flight Simulator X, and Lockheed Martin Prepared. Um, Now, there is this thing that Steve mentioned called Flight Simulator 2020. Um, and I'm going to talk about it in a little bit. The software that we've written does actually work with it to a point. However, the software or the simulator itself is for a blind person is completely inaccessible as far as you load up the simulator, you can't actually start a flight, you can't choose your flight or choose your aircraft, choose your file a flight plan, any of that stuff. At least with Flight Simulator X and Lockheed Martin Prepared, you can you know, when you start the system, the actual UI of the initial screens and the menus and filing flight plans and choosing aircraft and all that actually is fairly accessible. It's not perfect, but it's absolutely possible to get around it. Um, you know, when it becomes inaccessible is when you actually load up the plane and then you have no idea what's going on. So um, the blind flight simulation community is a fairly resourceful bunch, and we have over the years come up with various ways to do various things. So there's been a whole series of add-ons over the years that have provided varying levels of access to flight simulation. We start off with back in 2004, we had something called FS Navigator, which was basically a piece of software that would let you, you know, you could take off with it. You could control your autopilot to a point, and you could land if you were lucky. Um, and so I mean, it provided some access, but not much. You still didn't really know what was really going on in your aircraft, and there was a lot of things you couldn't control. Um, Around 2010, we had a pretty large jump into a package called It's Your Plane. It's Your Plane was developed by a guy in British Columbia, Canada, named Robert Caesar. And this was a completely voice controlled access to flight simulation. He didn't actually design it for blind people. He designed it for people that just wanted to do voice controlled planes. And so, but it turned out that the way he designed it, it actually did make things quite accessible. Now everything was controlled by voice command, so it was a little inefficient at times. But you could do you could check your flight plan information, you could check your altitude, you could do all sorts of things by voice control. Problem is that software was online, or a lot of it was online, and when he stopped developing the software, um, you know, around, I can't remember exactly when it was, but I think it was around 2014 maybe. Um, the software just went away. You couldn't use it anymore. So that left a lot of us kind of in the lurch. There was another piece of software called Multi Crew Experience, or MCE, that some of us use, that provides some of the same functionality, but not. Um, It's Your Plane would basically let you go from takeoff to landing, um, and Multi Crew Experience, even to this day, still doesn't. So there was another package called FSX Pilot, which again, I'm not going to go into too much detail, but again, it provides some access to the aircraft autopilot, but no access to reading a lot of instrumentation, or, you know, finding out, you know, you can find out the status of some aircraft systems, but not very much. Now, more recently, we have a product called FS Tramp, FSTRAMP, and this is a product that a lot of us still use today. I'd say most of us still use today, because it's still the only current product that lets us have sort of full access to the aircraft autopilot and flight planning. So it doesn't do, you know, it doesn't read your aircraft instrumentation really. It doesn't give you status of systems. It's strictly an autopilot and sort of mapping solution, which we can't use the mapping piece anyway. The developer of this software has been less than responsive to accessibility concerns, and so we're in a fairly big hurry to not use it anymore if we can at all help that. So this brings us to the software that we're going to talk about, called Talking Flight Monitor. Now, Talking Flight Monitor, I started developing Talking Flight Monitor in May of 2019. And it started off honestly as an experiment. It started off as somebody asked on one of the email lists that I'm on, would it be possible to have a piece of software that would read the nearest city to your aircraft as you're flying? Because, you know, as I said before, you could get up in the air and you could fly around, but if you can't see the screen, you don't have a lot of visuals, or you don't have any visuals of what's actually going on. So I'm like, I don't know. And I've always dabbled with learning to code, and this is a really good excuse to do this. So the good thing is about flight simulation is there are a zillion add-ons, and so flight simulators, FSX Unprepared and FS 2020, have a very rich API or of data that they expose to third-party programs. So you can get, I mean, hundreds of data points out of the simulator. It's just nobody was doing it accessibly. So Talking Flight Monitor started off as pulling the latitude and longitude of your virtual aircraft, going out to the internet and looking up the nearest city to that location and giving that to you every 5 minutes or so. And then it snowballed in a huge hurry from there. People started asking, if you can do that, can you do this? Can you do this? Can you do this? All right, so these are some of the key features. Some of the key features of Talking Flight Monitor. Sorry, I just lost my place. 1 second. So as I said before, sort of enhanced immersion, reads nearest city to aircraft. That was the very first thing we did. Now, at this point, we've now got over 70 hotkeys, and I think it's well over at this point, of things you can query from your aircraft. So everything from engine status, fuel levels, the aircraft lights, ground speed, airspeed, Mach speed, your transponder, radios, navigation info. I mean, I could go on and on. So what's happened recently is and I'll pass this over to Andy in a minute, but the original version of Talking Flight Monitor was written in Python. And earlier this year, we sort of realized that we were sort of running into the limits of what we could practically do with Python. And we decided to convert Talking Flight Monitor to C#, so C#.net. So you have full control over your autopilot. You can control, altitude, speed, heading, all that sort of thing. And this is all fully accessible. This is designed with blind people in mind. So everything is self-voicing. Everything is, it can be read through your screen reader or through Microsoft SAPI voices if you don't have a screen reader running or installed. The other thing that we've started doing now, because a lot of the solutions up to now have been, control over the aircraft autopilot, which is great, because honestly, that's how most jetliners fly now. Most pilots aren't flying these things by hand anymore. It's all controlled by computer anyway on modern aircraft. So what we decided to do is start to implement some features for manual flying. And so the very first one that I did was pitch and bank indication. So, but 8 months, a year ago, something like that, I added the ability to get sonification of your aircraft pitch and bank. So you get a tone in your left and right ear that tells you how far you're banked over, and you get a tone in the center that varies in pitch to indicate your pitch, the aircraft pitch of the nose of the aircraft. So, and we've also added recently a runway, what we call runway guidance mode, which when you're taking off on the runway, you get a series of tones in your left or right ear to let you know if you're off course or not. So the runways are always a certain heading. So let's say you're supposed to take off from, runway 35, and your heading is supposed to be 350. If you start to deviate from that heading, either left or right, you'll get tones that let you know that's what's going on. And the other thing before I hand this off to Andy is we've added the ability to do to read ILS, which is Instrument Landing System. So Talking Flight Monitor will read your your glide slope, your localizer, your navigation radios, all that sort of thing. And again, this is all fully accessible. All right, so earlier, so I was developing this software by myself up until earlier this summer. And Andy joined our community, and Andy had some cool ideas for some software that he wanted to, or some flight simulation software that he wanted to make accessible. And I got in touch with Andy and I said, you know, what you're doing and what I'm doing are pretty similar. Why don't we just put them together? And so now there's two of us working on the software, and we are getting ready to do some really, really cool things. And so I'm going to pass this off to Andy. And Andy, you can tell everybody what's coming next.
Hello, everybody. Can you hear me?
Yep.
All right. So yeah, to pull off of what you had said, this thing has snowballed pretty quick. When I came into the project, probably around, I'd say early August, late May, early August, it just kind of snowballed into this big, huge project. And the community of blind pilots that we're involved with right now, they're eating it up right now. And there's always feature requests and bug reports, but to bring you up to speed on what will be coming up in the next year or so, if things go the way they've been going, it might be sooner than a year, but no dates are promised here. Are we on that slide now?
We are, yep.
Yes, okay. So on the slide, you see some things that are coming up like flight planner, look around / where am I, taxiing system, aircraft profiles. So I'm gonna go through a little bit of these and explain what each one of them will do. Starting with the flight planner. And so one of the problems that we would have is being able to taxi. So if you're on the popular VATSIM, which has live air traffic controllers, people posing as them, they will a lot of times tell you you need to taxi or give us when you're ready to taxi. Well, we can't do that. So we have to a lot of times skip to the runway from the gate or wherever we're currently located. And that isn't the full experience of flying. So part of the experience of flying is to be able to taxi. So the flight planner will be able to let someone taxi to the runway, or it will let them skip to the runway. It will be their choice. In order to get the navigation aids like waypoints and approach types like ILSs and localizers and RNAV, there's a popular database called Navigraph. So we have a partnership with them now, and we'll use that. The waypoints list will have the typical things in it, like the identifier of the waypoint, the full name, the course, the heading. It will also feature hotkeys that will take you to the previous waypoint that you were at. It'll also jump you to the next waypoint in the list that you're supposed to be going to at the time. Now we have things called SIDS and STARS and en route waypoints. So the SIDS are standard instrument departure rules that dictates how the airplane has to travel when it leaves the airport in order to make way for traffic. STARS are the standard arrival routines, which are the same type of thing, but it dictates how the aircraft and the pilot are supposed to approach the airport in question. The en route waypoints are usually at cruising altitude, and the waypoints list will be color coded upon the user's choice of colors for each one of those sections. It will also have expandable and collapsible sections, so you don't have to wade through all of that stuff if you're looking for a particular section of your flight plan. Sometime down the road, we're going to work with a popular software developer called PMDG, which offers Boeing planes like 737s, 47s, 67s, and I believe that's what they offer. They also expose a rich amount of information to calling programs, so we will tap into that at some point. The flight planner will also offer takeoff and landing assistance. So what tends to happen a lot of times is, since we can't see the gauges on the screen and we can't always react in time once the plane leaves the ground. So If you just left it as is, then the plane will go into a state of chaos. It'll overspeed, it'll yaw, like start flipping loops and spinning around and all this other kind of stuff. So it will offer takeoff assistance, which if it is turned on, it will automatically manage the plane on liftoff. It'll also have landing assistance, which will do the same thing, but during a landing. It will also contain manual and automatic approach mechanisms. So you could manually line yourself up with the ILS or the runway, or you can have Talking Flight Monitor do it for you. It will contain oceanic reports, which is crucial when you're doing large bodies of water with air traffic controllers. The big thing, the ability to research your airports and runways and taxiways, because a large thing that we have now is we just choose a SID and a star and go with it. We don't know if it's taking us out of our way or if it's the right one we're supposed to take. So that will be handy to have. Fly missed approaches right now, if we miss the runway, we either crash or we just hang it up and say, okay, we're done, close the simulator. Each waypoint, you'll be able to change the waypoint's restrictions like altitude and speed. You'll be able to choose an aircraft profile, which we'll define later on. The next one, where am I and look around? So as Jason was mentioning before, we can't see the geographical locations. So we will implement a thing that will tell you where you're currently located on the ground and in the air. It will also give you the ability to see how far away you are from certain administrative borders. So for an example, if you set it to state or province level and you look around, it could tell you how far away the next city or province happens to be. The aircraft profiles will have customizable climb and descent profile settings. So you'll be able to tell it, for an example, anything below 10,000 feet, I want you to climb at 2,500 feet per minute at a speed of no more than 250 knots. And then once you get above that, do 1,500 feet per minute climb. Whatever it is you want, it'll be the same thing on descent. It'll contain the same flight assistance and landing assistance for each one of the planes that you have set up profiles for. The taxiing system, this is huge for us. It will announce when the aircraft leaves a taxiway, a gate, or a runway. It'll announce the ground speed automatically as the aircraft moves down the taxiway or runway. It'll announce the taxiway's thresholds, holding points, and also the runway holding points. And it'll provide a way for people to manually taxi with their stick or their keyboard, or it will just auto taxi out to the runway for you. That is what we have currently for the upcoming future features.
Is anybody give me a quick time check? How much time do we have left? I don't know if Steve, if you're on there, I just want to make sure.
At this point, it looks like we have less than a minute, but I don't know what our time.
Yeah, you have about 2 or 3 minutes.
Okay, so I'm going to play a very quick testimonial that somebody recorded for us, and then I'll give you a really quick quick information about how to get in touch with us. Here we go.
TFM has changed the blind flight simulation community since it came out. Right back when it was an add-on that simply allowed you to know what city you were flying over, to now where it can read many of the instruments in the cockpit, and also it is beginning to create its own autopilot software. We had all flown without TFM before its release, but we didn't know a lot about the aircraft we were flying in terms of the different gauges and instruments. We didn't really know in relation to airports and cities where we were, and TFM completely changed that. It's been great because it's been a very community-driven service which has developed through the wishes of the blind flight simulation community, and we've had a lot of cooperation from other developers who've helped TFM to grow. And so Jason and Andy have done a great job in bringing this piece of software to where it is now, and meaning we can fly in a lot more immersive experience, all of us blind pilots.
All right, and this is just a slide with some more information. We're not going to, I don't think we're going to have a lot of time after this, but my Twitter handle is at jfair, J as in Jason, F as in Frank, AYRE. It's at jfair. And you can also go to talkingflightmonitor.net, which is the website that we've set up for the project. This is all completely free and open source. So thank you very much.
Awesome. Well, thank you both for providing that informative talk for us today. And actually, I guess we'll have time for like one question, but I wanted to ask sort of what is your what are the challenges you've been kind of facing with TFM and with the new release of Microsoft Flight Simulator that came out this year?
Well, I mean, other than the complete inaccessibility of the UI, so I mean, getting into a flight as a blind person is extremely problematic because there's no text-to-speech output at all. You know, on launch there wasn't. I don't know if they're planning to add that. But also some of the APIs that we use to get data out of the simulator. For example, there's an API that we use to actually read information out of third-party add-ons. So we can pull text out of like some of the weather add-ons and stuff. I didn't mention that earlier, but that, for example, is not available.
I see. Okay, perfect. Well, thanks so much, guys, for that informative talk. We definitely got a lot of love from you in the chat. So I guess basically the best place to be able to find you all is talkingflightmonitor.net.
Yeah.
Yep, and like I said, or at jfair on Twitter, or my email is jfair, JFAYRE @gmail.com.
Perfect. And Andy, where can we be able to find you?
You can find me at talkingflightmonitor.net. Also, AJ, B as in boy, ORKA @gmail.com.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much, guys. I appreciate your insight today.